I knew Verstappen had won like every race last year, and I knew that this was the first race of this year. But I also remember, like, I do watch Drive to Survive, and I remember one year, like, everyone thought Mercedes was still good, and then they showed up, and the car, like, almost like didn't have a left wheel. Like, it was just like fundamentally flawed, and everyone figured it out. And it was like, oh my God, like, this is going to be way different than we thought. Is that happening right now with like Red Bull and Verstappen, who are like the favorites to win everything? Is that what's happening? Or is it just like randomness, bad luck? Like what's happening right now in Bahrain, which is a crazy question to ask, but I want to ask it.
I think it's more randomness than anything, because the big thing with Mercedes that year was it was the first year of new regulations. So everybody was kind of scrapping a lot of what they had to do for what the new regulations were going to be. Now, Verstappen and Red Bull are still heavy favorites to win the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship, and I think that's what it's going to end up being. I think there's a little bit of them just not putting everything out there in these practices and just kind of showing up to either the last practice and then qualifying, or just qualifying and being like, and it's over. So basically what everybody's been thinking is that way, but I really think, kind of as Drive to Survive showed this year, because essentially Red Bull outside of Horner didn't participate, the midfield is where there's could be a lot of interesting movement, and just like how you tier out the different teams, I think is fascinating this year, especially since it seems like the most common term is racing bulls is what AlphaTauri was, the Visa, Cash App, whatever, Red Bull team. That team seems to have taken a big step forward. Alpine is in like full disarray. They're falling down the grid to where they're down there with what used to be Alfa Romeo, that's now Sauber and Haas, and Williams has gotten better. So while Red Bull is probably still just going to be the class of the season, I think it's going to be slightly closer than last year, to where you'll actually have like more than 3 people win races possibly. And it's still going to be a lot of fun though, because of all the jockeying in the you can even say above the midfield, but just below Red Bull.
Rick, who's going to win the race coming up in Bahrain? Max Verstappen was a bigger favorite, now only minus 250 after the practice results today. Lewis Hamilton is at 7, Leclerc 11, Sergio Perez at 14, along with George Russell, Lando Norris at 20, Carlos Sainz at 22, along with Fernando Alonso of Aston Martin. Who wins coming up on Sunday? How are you betting it? A hard 30 seconds to wrap.
I think Verstappen is going to win. If there's anything I want to bet, it's something like Daniel Ricciardo of the Racing Bulls to get a top 6. You can find that at a decent number. He's getting enough respect to where a top 10 isn't getting you much value, but I think they're going to be the team that moves up the most. And I want to hat tip Alex Albon a little bit for a guy who should get some points, even though the Williams is a bottom half team.
I was texting with Rick during one of the last breaks. Rick Camp, who was on with us earlier, he was saying that like the F1 community media are speculating that Ferrari and Red Bull like didn't really try at the practice session today. I'm going to play both Checo, Sergio Perez, and Carlos Sainz, the 2 lesser members of Red Bull and Ferrari, to win the practice session tomorrow. So there are 10 Sainz and 12 Perez, respectively, right now for tomorrow, for Friday morning at BetMGM. And for the race, the Bahrain GP coming up on Sunday, I think I'm going to... Do I want to play against Verstappen? Yeah, I do. I'll play Leclerc at 11-1 in the Bahrain GP. I'm not going to put a big bet on it. I'll put a couple bucks on it just for something to sweat on Sunday morning. Maybe Max wins the race, and that'll just be that. I'll put a couple bucks on Charles Leclerc to win the Bahrain GP. I feel decent about Ferrari coming into the season. They've got some momentum with Lewis Hamilton coming over next year. I'm going to say something that's I don't think is crazy, because I'm going to offer like a breadth of outcomes here. I said last offseason, and I reserve the right to change my mind on this comment because, it's February and this past year's season ended in this month. And there's still a lot of time to go before next season. I said last offseason, I thought the Rams were the most interesting team in the NFL, where they could be absolutely brutal, or, like, Stafford could be great. And I had no idea how good Nakua was going to be in the rookie defenders, but just, Stafford, Kupp, McVay. Even just Stafford, McVay. Like, Hall of Fame quarterback, maybe Hall of Fame coach. Maybe they could wildly exceed expectations, and the market was really down on the Rams coming into the year. This is not apples to apples, because the team that we'll discuss to start the Power Hour, Ken, will not have, like, a really low win total, even though they missed the playoffs this past year. I would not be surprised if the Jacksonville Jaguars not bottomed out because I think the team's too good and like Lawrence is too good for them to go like 3-14 if Lawrence is healthy. But I wouldn't be surprised if they went 6-11, Peterson gets fired. I also wouldn't be surprised if they went like 14-3 and like figured it out. And like the light bulb goes off for Lawrence. Lawrence wins MVP. They bring Josh Allen back. Peterson calls the plays next year. And my interpretation of Peterson's comments about, these are discussions that we'll have as to who's going to call the plays, that means he's calling the plays. Because if Press Taylor were calling the plays, he would just say Press Taylor's calling the plays. Peterson's going to call the plays this season for the Jaguars. I would be pretty surprised if that weren't the case. It feels like Jacksonville's upside is to win like 13 or 14 games this year. And there's no way they're going to be priced like that. 30-1 to win the Super Bowl. I think they're going to be the team that I think is like the Rams of this offseason, where I wouldn't be surprised if they were terrible or freaking awesome. Probably more likely to be awesome.
Statistically, and this isn't Cleveland, like Lawrence played a lot, and he did play with injuries for part of the season. We kind of know that. But look, like a lot of teams had a lot worse health than the Jacksonville Jaguars did last year. They didn't get a bad draw versus some of the other teams, like the Browns, for example. Jacksonville's particular statistically, they were 18th in offensive DVO, which is like if I told you Lawrence was 18th last year against that division and that schedule, I mean, you would have thought he missed the whole season. I mean, you would have thought it was somebody else the entire time. I mean, really, like what? Like what happened? 18th in offense, 10th in defense. A lot of their like individual metrics, things that tend to predict postseason success, basically right in that kind of like middle third, middle 10 teams in the league, middle 8 teams in the league at like everything. Those teams, here's what we did. One thing that predicts the Super Bowl whenever we get to the end of the year. Remember, I pitched you net touchdowns last year, which is tracked by the official NFL stats database. How many touchdowns you score versus touchdowns you allow, like are actually a really good measure of team quality. They were negative last year. They allowed more touchdowns than they scored for a team that won 9 games. So just like, what? Like, so I get the high ceiling argument that you're making. It's the same coach and the same court. Like we saw it. It can't be that and just a little better. It can't be just a little better than a couple of years ago. So I get that part of it. Then you look at this and it looks like they're so far away from that. It just looks like they're really far away. Now, does the play caller and quarterback health and an attitude change, I guess, to define the other thing that you were talking about, like, does that get you there? I don't know, because now the division, we back AFC South 2024. Houston's good. Indy's good. Like, Tennessee's bad, but we went into last year saying all 3 were bad, and Jacksonville was I bet Jacksonville to win the division in, like, a year ago. I bet them to win at, like, minus 120 or something. And I was like, this is crazy. Look at the other 3 teams. And then they fold at the end like a lawn chair, and we'll see what happens. So their schedule, and again, like it's going to be more difficult. We know Houston's good. Like we know Indianapolis is at least average, probably a little better, and Richardson maybe plays all the games. NFC, AFC South, their draw this year. Also, AFC South and NFC South drew each other last year, which created insane easy schedules for a lot of those teams. That isn't the case again this year. They don't draw the NFC South again, obviously. Instead, they draw the NFC North and the AFC East. Whoops. So Jacksonville will have a much more difficult schedule. Their 3 unique set of games. They play Cleveland and Vegas, and then their unique 17th game is against the Eagles, which is not a picnic either. So just like this, when you say it can go off the rails, like I am lukewarm interested already in betting Peterson to be the first coach fired. And you need to see the order of the games to be able to really like want to make that bet versus McCarthy versus somebody else. But like, the groundwork is laid here for this to be possible. They're just not very good. That's what it is. They're just not very good. Like they just aren't. And you don't go from like not very good. You make basically no changes. And it's like, well, now they're 15-2. Like, well, that doesn't really happen. Like you got to change something. And the change is probably that they're going to have a new coach if that is going to be the change. And it probably won't be that they get rid of Trevor Lawrence. They'll probably keep him for a while. So look, like we project a win total against that schedule with these particulars last year. I would be really surprised if it's anything above 9, and either 8.5 or 9, I think makes a lot of sense.
I think 8.5 is the perfect number. 8.5 juiced over, maybe, like to finish over 500.
I wonder if you would draw like a bunch of interest on 8.5. I would not bet that. I would be hoping like market loves Jacksonville, 9 juiced way over. I plus under on 9 sounds pretty good for me with this team. And yeah, that's a bet against Lawrence just basically being over 500. I might make that bet. My theory on college basketball futures, I think a lot of people that follow the sport really closely like to bet long shot teams at the start of the season, right? 100 to 1s, 200 to 1s, 80 to 1s. I'm going to get ahead of this because I think this team's really good and I think they have a chance to be a really low price going into the tournament. I just don't know enough to do that. And I can't devote enough time to do that. Like, I don't have that. I don't have that ability. And there are people who do, and God bless them. There are people that had San Diego State like 300 to 1 in the final last year because, like, they just, at the start of the year, they weren't being priced like a team that was reasonable. And then they were very reasonable and they almost won the championship. But, like, so I think that's an okay time to bet because you're obviously betting stuff that's going to be wildly different 4 months into the future, right? I remember the year that Gonzaga was a 1 seed with Kelly Olynyk and lost to Wichita State in the second round when Wichita State made like all the 3-pointers, shot like 60% from 3 and beat Gonzaga. Pretty sure that was second round game in like 12, maybe something like that, maybe 11. And I had bet Gonzaga like November 20th at 45 to 1 to win the tournament. And they went in as like the favorite to win the tournament. So that kind of betting I'm into, I get it. I can't devote it. But then once that window ends, like December 1st, November, Thanksgiving, Maui Invitational, like cat's out of the bag. You know who the good teams are at that point, too late. Then to me, there just isn't another window to bet these teams until we know the bracket. There just isn't. There's too much luck in play. Like, oh, I bet this price. That's awesome. Well, too bad. Now UConn's the next game. Whoops. And you're never going to know. You're going to have no idea. And the committee's dumb. They do bad stuff all the time. You can't project
like you bet Illinois a couple years ago and you get Loyola in the second round.
You get Loyola in the second round. Oh, sorry. Great futures bet, though.